gets a goal? Who got the assist? Who got the assist?
Hello everyone, hope you're doing well. So it's a real quick turnaround for us this week with the Premier League having a short breather for FA Cup third round this weekend, meaning of course always eventful influx midweek fixtures and quick turnarounds between game weeks, meaning ultimately a shorter podcast today. We'll get into, now we know that assistant manager and chip strategy is all the rage, double game week 24 announced, prices for assistant managers have all been released as well, but I should say here, we're not going to be getting into that too much on this pod, just because, there's not really enough time. But next big pod, the usual show time is on a Tuesday, so it'll be next Tuesday. We'll definitely go into that in more detail, give our thoughts, and obviously give a few, hopefully, unique insights as well from thinking about it. There's been an initial sort of rush to give views, etc., etc. It's just not really falling quite right for us in terms of the way the game weeks fall. So pop in for this episode, but next time we'll definitely do something a bit bigger on it. So many people think of the podcast as Sam. Oh, so annoying, isn't it? As always, of course, I'm joined by Sam. You're right, mate. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad in the real world. Fantasy could be going a little bit better, so I'm hoping this is some sort of FPL-based therapy for today. In the meantime, we are Who Got the Assist. On today's pod, we'll be going through team updates. One of us, it looks like a pretty good week. The other one, not so good. I think you can guess exactly who. In terms of the pod focus for the week, it will be a bit shorter. We'll be focusing on the game week preview ahead. The knee-jerk will involve talking about sticking with misfiring players like Jackson, possibly Semenyo, and a few others, over purchasing players with good immediate fixtures and a decent record of performing, perhaps over expectation, looking at Chris Wood, who neither of us own yet. Best transfers in, of course. Time to start planning ahead for double game week 24 on the horizon will be a key question here. And best captains, which will perhaps be quite an interesting debate, considering there are a few different names in the hat once again. Bold Claims makes a return as always, and a look ahead at our teams. It is Thursday, the 16th of January. We're half-time in Man United Southampton. My beloved Southampton are actually leading at Old Trafford, but stay tuned and I'm sure we'll mess that up. And Ipswich Brighton, I think Brighton are 1-0 up in the second half at the moment as we speak. So game week's not quite over, but we can have a look at game week reviews so far, can't we, Tom?
Yeah, it's not going to change. The story isn't going to be changed too much, is it? So I've had a decent week. I'm on the magical 69 at the moment. Basically, I had the captaincy on Isaac last week. Lion Eddie came out, and I didn't trust him for a second when he said, I think he'd be okay. So I swapped the captaincy to Palmer. Palmer obviously came through with the goal. And to be honest, what one of the stories could be that shouldn't have overthought it, shouldn't have gone to Palmer. The other story is Palmer and Nicholas Jackson in that first half, how they contrived to leave so many points at the table. Unreal, absolutely unreal. Jackson, I've got to keep him for Wolves, haven't I? But really frustrating. The underlying data is there, but if you watch him play, I'm glad I wasn't watching him play. So I don't own I don't have TNT, but seeing the highlights, it's such a wincer, so difficult to watch. And yeah. There were so many points left on the table that it was so infuriating seeing the highlights. But fair play to those who did go with Isaac in the end. I just couldn't quite take that chance. But fortunately, obviously, Palmer did outscore Salah, which much to your chagrin and many others, Sam. Elsewhere, Isaac, Gordon with the goal. Ismail Assar came through with an assist, which was okay. I mean, it's quite good to have differential scoring anything above appearance. And then Lewis Hall at the back got a clean sheet. It looks like Van Hecken may come through with a clean sheet as well, but we don't really know about that. So that's pretty much my week. 69, 100k green to 550k, but it just feels like to and fro this season so much that I'm not going to be popping any champagne bottles quite yet about my progress. Dare I ask, how's it been for you?
Yeah, kind of a car crash. So Captain Salah, I did still genuinely believe he was a very decent option against Nottingham Forest, despite their good defensive data. Obviously, we're an outcome-driven game. It didn't pan out, and when Palmer and Isak, the two other very well-captained assets, scoring and hauling in Isak's case, that hurt quite a lot. Outside of that, the double Arsenal clean sheet yet again falters. Today, I've got João Pedro on a yellow card with no returns, of course, blocking Semenyo on the bench. Not only Semenyo on the bench either, Robinson as well with 7 points too. So leaving at the moment 21 points on the bench right now if we count Greaves' extra point for an appearance in the second half. Hall got the clean sheet, but he's pretty well owned. Outside of that, no one who could have really done any decent benefit to my rank has performed. The only players in my starting 11 to get anything outside of Hall were players that either did nothing for my rank or actively hurt my rank, Palmer and Isak. Obviously, Ahmad's got the second half to go. João Pedro's got a few minutes to go, but I'm not really expecting much. And my progress from the last few game weeks has kind of been cancelled out. The only positive, I suppose, is I did roll a transfer again. So I've got 4 free transfers going into game week 22. But as we'll come on to later on in the pod, that seems to be leaving me with a bit of decision paralysis more than anything else. And I don't really know which way to turn at the moment. So yeah, fingers crossed this provides a little bit more clarity.
Oh yeah, sorry mate. It's always painful, isn't it, when those sorts of weeks manifest themselves? And yeah, I mean, you really know all the spiel, but stuff like, it was the right decision to leave those two on the bench for who you played. I mean, yeah, it's just that side of you, isn't it? You're like, oh god, I've seen all those points go off. And then with the captaincy, we always said it was 33 effectively, and ultimately you just picked the short straw there. Yeah, it's just unlucky. And yeah, it's so brutal at the moment, isn't it, that one bad week means you fall back a fair way, really right now. And it also kind of feels like we're all kind of, I don't know, like it feels like even if you have a good week, you don't really kind of go through the stratosphere. Like it feels so like sort of like you're trying to run through treacle or something right now a little bit. I don't know, maybe that's just me where I am at my OR.
Yeah, quite possibly. Yeah, it's just a bit frustrating. I don't want to get too down in the dumps about it because I've had up until this point 6 green arrows in the last 7 or 5 in the last 6. So it's been a decent run. Just feels like 1 step forward, 2 steps back with this game week. And yeah, when the 2 main players that hurt me were Wood and Gordon, didn't have either, both ownership going up. We'll obviously talk about Wood, but I think there's a place to be talking about Gordon in this pod as well. And Burmo was basically the player I was taking on Gordon with, and he actually looked really good and was unlucky not to get something. But I still think he's a good hold, honestly. And as much as I'd love to have Gordon, I don't think it's the incorrect decision to be holding on to Mbeumo. Obviously, this week is not ideal with Liverpool up next. But yeah, generally speaking, I'm fairly happy with my team. It's just a couple of edge pieces that obviously there's always going to be 1 or 2 players I'd prefer to have. And those players are the ones that happen to hurt me this week. Yeah,
definitely. See last week's pod for more detail on that one. So yeah, very short and sweet this week. Straight into the game week preview. And it's knee-jerk best transfers, best captain, and the bold claims. Knee-jerk this week, I've kind of called this Jettison Jackson, but it just as easily have been called, should we sell players who are performing in the data, but not in the outcome for players who are doing the reverse? That doesn't sound as zingy. So for Jettison Jackson, but basically, we're basically saying if you've got a player like Jackson, a player like Semenyo, who's performing well in the data, would you sell them for someone like Chris Wood or hold on? Taking kind of Jackson as a bit of a, neither of us own Wood, I know probably most of you out there do. So I think probably we'll try to go on the side of players who are performing but not in the data, but not doing particularly well right now. But yeah, in the case of Jackson, obviously we both massively regret buying him in for Isak. We both subsequently bought it in Isak, but a few weeks ago we did that. And yeah, it was ideal for me to play him this week. Eventually they put him on the pitch over Jimenez. So I didn't want to watch him. He's a sort of player who's very, very difficult to watch. Huge XG, as is his want, and nothing converted. Argument he's a bit unlucky in places. So one of the Travers saves just in the right place to save the header point blank, despite not knowing much about it. But maybe at this point we can think it's a pattern. And Semenyo, bit of a one-trick pony, perhaps, despite all those shots. Those sorts of players, effectively, Sam, we're in the province of thinking about. And it's such a difficult kind of conundrum, isn't it, when you've got a player who is perhaps overperforming, like a Wood, but is still lethal. One shot, one goal, all you need against Liverpool. You've got a player like that staring you in the face for a good fixture, but you've got Jackson with a good fixture as well. Could you do it? Could you sell him? Could you make that swap? It's so hard to assess, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, that's basically my key decision this week, is whether or not to lose faith in Jackson and kind of go against my beliefs as an FPL manager in the process a little bit too. Because looking at the data, as we'll come on to, Woods is, I think, 0.41, 0.42 XGI per 90, which, it's not terrible for a player that was previously quite considerably below 7 million. It's obviously fine. But when you now look at his price approaching 7 million, and the fact that it is really one good fixture left of the run, it's Southampton, who have so far today at the least looked a little bit more solid at the back. I won't try and tempt anyone away from Chris Wood because he is a good option against Southampton, no question about that. But the data's not exceptional. He is overperforming, but that can also just mean he's being lethal at the same time. Both things can be true. That it's almost two ways of describing the exact same thing we're seeing. He is overperforming because he's lethal, and the reverse is also true. So it's just whether or not we predict that to continue. And yes, there's a good chance that it continues against Southampton, but we're not making transfers just for one game week. We're making them for several. And my key decision this week is whether or not Jackson, who is more expensive, doesn't have penalties, but much, much better data and with better fixtures for a much longer period of time, is worth getting rid of for a player who has much worse data, one good game week, admittedly a very good game week. You could look at moving him off in a couple of weeks. And there's an argument and one angle I'm looking at, which is you could go to Chris Wood for this week, and maybe in 2 or 3 game weeks time, because their run isn't terrible for the next couple of game weeks, then you could look at someone like Wissa, who jumps into a great run around game week 25. So that is an angle, and I don't want to dismiss that. But if it was just a straight shootout between Wood and Jackson, it's very head versus heart. And my head is telling me Jackson is the play here. You keep the faith, because the data usually is a better predictor of future returns than past returns are, if that makes sense. So the data-led manager inside me is screaming, don't bin off Jackson. But it is quite difficult to do so when you see half the game going towards a player who's in great nick on penalties, going up against one of the worst Premier League sides we've seen in years and years and years. And I'm saying that as a Southampton fan. It's quite difficult to resist. I don't know how you see this one, Tom, but it's going to go down to the wire for me.
Yeah, it is genuinely incredibly difficult to resist. You're right. I feel we see this every year, don't we? With one player or other, where you get both sides of that kind of debate that you kind of accurately summarised, where both of the sides of the quote unquote argument have an equally valid point, and there's no real sort of way of deciding whether a player is overperforming or whether he is just quite good. Until the end of the season. And a name that springs to mind when it comes to Chris Wood this year is Danny Ings. That amazing year at Southampton, when he was just an absolute beast. It really
his data was good that year, though, and
exactly. And Woods is still every year, right? Wood is one of these players who is going to bag you 10 goals in the Premier League. That's indisputable, right? And he should have a lot of what's on 13 now. I think his highest score before this was like 14 for Burnley a few years back. So he's very close to kind of where he tends to end up. But his underlying data has always been sort of, all right. It's not been great. He's just performing in a team which is set up to service him effectively. And as for Liverpool, all he needs at the moment, because he's got that confidence, one chance, one goal, and he's playing a team who are beating Man United at the moment. Do you
whatever
sell
that
Jackson?
means.
I know that can mean whatever you want it to mean. As with all of these sorts of elements of discussion, Wood by just to note is second for XGA performance this year, or joint second with Cunha, and Bumo is still top. Would you do you buy in now? Is it kind of too late, or is it just kind of the ultimate sort of cover move? I think a lot of that, as we spoke about last week, is moderated by your overall rank right now, to some extent. Like where we are in the 500k plus, there's not really much to be gained by covering that, is there? Unless you're kind of really, really convinced that Wood's going to be, going stellar in that game versus Southampton. I don't know, Sam. A little bit of thinking about how Forest play, I wonder if it might not be as good for them. This is obviously massive confirmation bias, and I'm at no point suggesting that Southampton are going to turn into 90s Milan, but
What?
I'm wondering whether it may suit, it may not be as good for Forest that Southampton probably won't want the ball either. So I don't know. It may not quite suit their game plan, that they. Yeah, I don't know. It feels like what was the start of the season? One of the kind of the 10 things that we said some mistakes we weren't going to make. One game week is not going to make or break your season, right?
Yeah.
But we've got a perfectly good example of a player, Nico Jackson, who is being sold in droves, and still putting up the underlying data, 1.18 xG in that game. So 1.42 xG in that game.
Yeah.
And a player versus a player playing a defense which leaves lots to be desired, and then you've got Chris Wood doing exactly the same. Like, what's to say that they both won't score equally? So I don't know, Sam. I don't know. For me, it's I'm thinking that right now, because of where we are rank wise, and also at this moment in the season with a double game week coming up where free transfers and flexibility is perhaps more valuable, maybe I just think, you know what, at this juncture, I think I'm going to stick with Jackson and then probably move him on to someone like Gakpo in the end to target that double game in 24. Because in the long run, it probably is better for me to do that. If you do have 5 free transfers and you don't have Wood and you do have a Jackson, I'd give a lot more thought to grabbing Wood this week. Yep, and let that one go. It's gone. And also, if you are kind of trying to defend rank or defend in the mini league or something like that, and you're concerned that your rivals around you are going to be captaining Wood, definitely do cover that. But I think overall, from my perspective, I think it is a case of just kind of leave it be. Reluctantly, and I know for you especially, because I can just do Jimenez to Wood, I can do Jackson to Wood. I know for you it's a bit trickier, isn't it? If you wanted to keep Jackson, like have your cake and eat it, keep Jackson and also bring Wood in, like it feels a bit kind of, you're in the area where you're kind of forcing it a little bit, and I don't know if you are in the position where you're forcing Wood in as well. Again, let that one go, guys. I think that we are in a bit of a sticky situation. So yeah, big sofa needed, but I don't know, mate. I feel like we need to just both get down to DFS during this week and then hide behind the sofa this weekend.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm thinking at the moment. I'm trying desperately to have a longer term horizon on this. And look, he'll keep scoring goals at a certain rate. Wood is not going to just completely drop out of the FPL conversation. But just to list the fixtures after Southampton, it's Bournemouth, Brighton, Fulham, Newcastle, Arsenal, Man City. It's not inspiring. So it's very easy to look at the next fixture coming. Obviously, if you've already got him, you love it. It's absolutely fine. And he's probably not a sell until after game week 25. But in terms of bringing him in, I keep talking about this high bar for transfers. And whilst I've already got 4, getting that 5th one is also of value, especially with double game weeks to come. And once game week 22 is out the way, I think a whole new selection of forwards are going to come into my thinking. And I don't want to kind of use a transfer to get further away from the template I want to have going into double game week season. I'm just not fully confident Wood will be in it by that point. And for the sake of one game week, which again, we keep trying to remind ourselves on, we're not obsessing over one player for 1 week. It never seems to go well for me when I do that. And I know that I'll look at my side ahead of game week 23, even if Wood has got 2 goals, maybe even a hat-trick against Southampton, and think, yeah, but how long is he actually staying for? especially because I think I'm pretty confident that I do want to hold on to Jackson now. I think because that decision in the back of my mind is fairly safe, I'm fairly comfortable, because I am a data-driven manager. I don't want to bin off Jackson knowing the minutes are decent, the data's decent, the fixtures are great. Selling someone like João Pedro, as awfully as he's been today, obviously could have even got sent off by the sounds of it, has now been subbed off. He's still on penalties. He's likely to get good minutes, and he's cheaper than Chris Wood as well. So I'd need to make a second transfer. That would take me even further back and bring in a player that in a couple of weeks I might not even want anyway. So as begrudgingly as I say this, and I can almost see that Interstellar meme coming where I'm hammering on the bookshelf again later on in the season, where I'm like, why didn't you just buy this guy? He keeps scoring goals. But I am being stubborn, and maybe that stubbornness will pay off. Maybe it won't, but I need to stay true to my values, I think. And I'm probably going to resist bringing in Chris Wood for João Pedro for that reason, as unhappy as I am about that for this game week in particular.
Yeah, I think so. God, it's going to be horrible, isn't it? I think one of those. I'm not going to look at the overall rank until, if he does do anything. I won't be looking at my overall rank until Monday night. That's for sure. When's that game? Oh dear me! At least it's not televised on Sunday. But yeah, there's gonna be precious little going on that day as well. FPL wise, apart from I'll have no players playing on Sunday as well. So I think it might be a garden centre day, as Mark Southerns always puts it. Oof. Right. Well, knee jerk. It sounds like our knees are both very much in check this week, which is always very good, I suppose, in some ways. But should we be scared? Absolutely. Especially looking at the top 5 transfers in, Sam, for this week. It's quite testy, isn't it? Wood top 300,000 transfers in for Wood, up 6.9, so it's risen 0.9 since the start of the season. Matt Sells, who is in basically God mode. Don't know what he's done to hack the mainframe of the Matrix, but he certainly has done that. Always kind of seen as a bit of as a decent keeper. I remember I've had him on Foot Manager in the past, and he's kind of been a good sort of backup or a decent keeper to be promoted with, that you eventually sort of phase out. But really, come on leaps and bounds this year. Few people beginning to come off Ryan now, I think, but it's very, very unusual to see a goalkeeper second for transfers in, that's for sure. Isaac being bought in 136,000, Aina 108,000. So that Nottingham Forest defensive ownership as well creeping up an awful lot. And that in of itself, Sam, is probably worth another quick discussion. We called this wood through the trees, and I think it could have been wood through the forest, to be honest, actually. It wouldn't have fit on the YouTube thumbnail, would it? But that's what we tell ourselves. I mean, Christ, I really hope you guys score, basically. I mean, obviously, what I'm hoping for the most is is basically what we've seen tonight, like a 1-0 win for Southampton out of nowhere. But I mean, it's definitely been one of those this year where, I don't know, we said a few weeks ago that maybe the Forest defence has been, quote unquote, perhaps slept on a little bit. It's definitely kind of now perhaps breaking the big time, but lots of people own the likes of Aina for a long while. Like my sister, who doesn't really kind of follow FPL stuff at all, but does kind of do her team every week, look at it every week, etc., has had Aina since he was 4.5 and just been obviously loving life. Forest third now for XUC in the league. I mean, again, it's one of those sort of concerns that perhaps this week is the biggest, because of the Southampton game after that. They've got Bournemouth, Brighton, Fulham. None of them bad fixtures for Chris Wood if you are thinking of buying him in this week. But the beauty of Forest, a little bit like kind of Arsenal last year, is that they can get a clean sheet in any game. That it's very unusual that you end up with a team at the bargain basement prices they started the season, comprising players that, if you did have to play a Neco Williams, or did have to play a Milenkovic, or did have to play an Aina against, I think they've got Arsenal and City in quick succession coming up at some point in the near future.
27, 28, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, if you had to play one of them in those just due to injuries and stuff, you kind of be like, well, it's not worth the transfer. I'm just going to do that because there's an okay chance that Forest do it. So very, very impressed with what Nuno's done there. And again, a bit of a concern for non-owners this week. And we're both principally hoping that, I mean, you've got Robinson and Hall. I've just got a Hall, and I'm hoping for a Hall effectively to try to cancel out what is going to be a monstrous effective ownership, both up top and at the back for Nottingham Forest.
Yeah, Nottingham Forest defence, again, has just been something I've slept on all season. The data, even last season, was looking pretty decent at times. This season has been fantastic. I'm running at about 1.1 XGC per 90. Obviously, ownership's creeping up, and I would assume effective ownership's going to be approaching 100%. So basically, if they keep a clean sheet, that's effectively going to be something like an extra 4 points against you. So 6, including the appearance points on average. So it's not the end of the world, but it is painful at that point if they do keep a clean sheet. What I will say, though, is if you're not already there, Southampton's the good opportunity. Like we said with Chris Wood in terms of the attacking acumen, defensively, even though the data's good, I'm not loving the fixtures over the next 6. You've got good attacking teams in there. I'd back any of those teams to score even against Forest. And I know Forest are a great defence, but I would be surprised if they kept more than 2 clean sheets in that 6 from 23 to 28. And because of that, I'm more happy or more comfortable to back against that side of it than I am Chris Wood at this point in time, because I can see him scoring in any of those games, not all of them, but I don't necessarily see many clean sheets there. And I'm more confident and more bullish on that than I am on avoiding Chris Wood, especially given that there are quite a few other defenders around the same price points as those Nottingham Forest defenders that I'm actually really happy with. So Robinson, Hall as well, Munoz you could go to, who has great fixtures, all decent options at that sort of price point. So I don't think it's quite as difficult to back against the Nottingham Forest defence as it is in terms of the decision making to go without Chris Wood. But nevertheless, if they do keep a clean sheet against Southampton, it is going to be slightly painful. After that, though, I wouldn't be as confident in them personally.
Yeah, no, fair enough. I'm hoping you're right, effectively, because I've just got limited transfers. That I mean, we always end up in a situation at some point. Depending on your play style, of course. Like even me, who's quite kind of transfer friendly, if I see a problem, I do kind of often opt to fix it. In this case, because we've got impending doubles, it kind of feels like keeping powder dry, as discussed, is probably the best way. And as I said a few weeks back, in terms of not buying a Castagna or buying a Neco Williams, I think was on the menu as well, because I've got Lewis Hall and I'm fairly happy with just playing him. Like Newcastle's defense is also pretty good. I think they're not too far off Forest, in fact.
Yeah, they're closing in.
Yeah. So I think it's just one of those really where you've got to just kind of assess the situation where you are. And the beauty of this year, as we've said ad nauseam, is just that people are in such different situations when it comes to free transfers that like it's absolutely fine if you do have those free transfers that you can then replenish over the next few weeks. Probably not as much as likely now, but say you've got 5 free transfers, you're happy with your team everywhere else, and there's a gap for a Forest defender this week or a gap for a Wood this week, I'm not going to begrudge you buying them in. There's no reason not to, frankly. But where I am, probably not. Where you, and in your situation, from what you discussed, Sam, if you did have like a more obvious kind of move from X to Y, then yeah, if you had a Cunha or something and you could get to Wood, I still had the Jesus hanging around and could get to Wood, you'd be doing that in a heartbeat, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
And that's kind of where we kind of land on that one. Gordon in 5th, really love that guy. Honestly, just completely, I don't know. It took him a while this year. I started with him this season, and he looked a bit off the pace. Obviously, he kind of had a bit of a malaise, I think, between at least before the game week's gotten to double figures. But from game week, I'm going to say game week from 15, 16 onwards, he's just been really consistent week to week, and at the price he's just been brilliant, really. And obviously all those routes to points as well, and he and Isaac having that really good connection. I suspect we'll be here discussing him again next week, Sam, with the Southampton game in 23. But as you say, it's quite tough for some people. Like I obviously maybe just mention what your midfield is, but for people like you, there's just no room at the inn, is there? And you could be saying, yeah, Bumo to Gordon. It's not as easy as it looks on paper, is it, making a move like that?
It's not easy, but it is in the back of my mind that it's a possibility just for a couple of game weeks. And because I've got 4 free transfers, just using one, because I can do it very easily because he's cheaper than Mbermo, because it's Liverpool, Crystal Palace up next for Mbermo, as good as he is at home and even against the best defences, it's quite hard to argue that Gordon doesn't stand up pretty well against him against Bournemouth and Southampton. With the data he's putting up, which is actually better than Mbermo's, even with Mbermo's penalties added in as well. Gordon's data, even from an XG point of view, is actually marginally better. So I am a little bit tempted to look at that as an option just for a couple of game weeks and then maybe pivot back to Mbermo when I release funds elsewhere. Maybe once I've got rid of Trent after the double game week, for example, something like that. And I could manufacture a way to get both of them back in rather than just have one or the other. And there's also a 3 free transfer route that could get me from Ahmad to Gordon as well. Although that does seem pretty knee-jerky and pretty heavy on the transfers for what is a very good player, but he's also only a player that's getting 1 return a game week at the moment. So I don't want to rip up my team for someone who it hasn't been as explosive as an Isak, and he might once or twice a season really haul, but the suggestion I would float is that Isak is the main man there. He hogs most of the XG and therefore in most cases is very likely to also get the bonus points as well, because he's much more likely to get multiple attacking returns. And as a striker, if you score a goal versus a midfielder that scores a goal in a 2-0 win, the bonus points are more heavily weighted towards getting the Isaks of the world, your 3 bonus rather than Gordon's. So I think that whilst I would love him, I don't want to necessarily rip apart my team. For 1 free transfer, though, if I can figure out a way that I can get back to Mbermo in a couple of game weeks, I don't hate it. But again, it's possibly a little bit knee-jerky, but because I've got quite a few free transfers, it's a luxury that I could afford myself if I really wanted to.
Yeah, I mean, this one is a little bit kind of less clear than maybe the move that you described to get Woods. Let it go. This one I quite like as a potential. Like, you can probably find a way to engineer Bumo back in for the Spurs game in 24. Obviously, probably gonna have other fish to fry in 24. But you could probably kind of figure out a way to engineer Bumo back in. Like, on the data, you're right. Like, it's actually quite close. It's actually really close. I mean, it's like 0.1 between them in terms of the underlying non-pen data. They're kind of 13th and 14th in the league effectively. And you're right that Gordon's non-pen XG is a lot better. Last couple of games, there have been a few sort of glaring misses from Gordon. Did have to double check it wasn't Gordon, and it was Gordon, not Hall, of course. But he and Newcastle are simply flying at the moment, and I would say that for what you said about him getting 1 return a week, it's really not far off more than that. It really isn't.
It's not. No,
his time frame is still pretty good, Gordon. I mean, I don't really know it depends on kind of obviously the manifestations with the cup and things like that. Do think that they're in quite a good position to have that blank come up, which means double for them, which will probably mean that, if you do have Gordon, it may be a case you just keep him to the end. They don't really they've got Man City, Forest and Liverpool 25-27, which would be a real sort of big test for them. But the beauty of Newcastle, of course, is no Europe. So they do have kind of that relaxed approach to what's going on around them. So he might be a player that's worth covering. I think there is kind of still enough gain there to make it a worthwhile one. If it's not an awkward move, especially with you having quite a lot of transfers, as you say, to play with, that might be one that I'd be considering. But it's one you'd have to consider that quite strongly, wouldn't you? Really, you wouldn't be one that you just kind of just doing a heartbeat sort of thing, as described with that sort of potential kind of Wood transfer in or something like that. But yeah, I do really like Gordon. I think that while he and Isak are on, you got to ride that wave a little bit, I suppose. On the other side of the transfers, Jesus been transferred out. Saw all the shirts stay strong, Gabby and things like that. It's such a shame for him. Obviously, I think it's the other knee as well, which is now gone. Which is really heartbreaking for Jesus. Just he was beginning to look again a little bit like a player that we really needed. But hey, that might mean that we end up with a Sesko or something like that. One for Starshot Deep Space Nine fans. If we get him, I will live with it. I will live with it. Luis Diaz being sold as well. I know that a friend of the pod, James FPL, has got Luis Diaz. There's quite a few people who did go there. I don't know if anyone is kind of just side grading to the likes of Jota or something like that. It's quite tricky if you do own a Diaz, isn't it, Sam? Because it's like, who's to say that he's not going to play the next game? And it really feels like with him, Jota, maybe not Gakpo as much, but there is definitely kind of a bit of a revolving cast, shall we say, when it comes to Liverpool right now. So if you do have like an outstanding transfer to make, like a Gordon, then maybe I'd do that and then reassess in 24 if it was me.
Yeah, I think with that Liverpool front line, it's 4 fits into 3. One of those is obviously Salah is locked in. We don't need to discuss that. And then it's the other 3 being Jota, Gakpo, and Luis Diaz. I think the one I'm most confident on right now is Gakpo, obviously playing in a different position in FPL terms to the others. So it isn't quite the same conversation when we include him within it. I am fairly confident on Luis Diaz moving forwards. Yet his minutes are at risk, but Jota, sadly for him, doesn't seem to be able to stay fit that long. And I think more consistently we will see Luis Diaz playing alongside Gakpo. But with all of that being said, if Jota can stay fit, it is a proper lottery, even including Gakpo, who is the form player at the moment. But we saw that with Diaz earlier on this season. We've seen that with Jota in seasons past as well. It only takes 1 or 2 poorish game weeks in a row, or even a poor half in some cases with Slot. He is very decisive and very quick to switch things up if things aren't working, for them to see themselves become a risk all of a sudden. So Gakpo is never far away from becoming a risk. So whilst he looks like the safer of the 3 alternatives to Salah in the forward line at the moment, by the time we get to game week 24, that could be completely different. So if you don't have them already, I certainly wouldn't be buying any of them right now, because I'd want more information. And I'd probably want to actually just buy the player that I back going into game week 24 itself rather than early, because things with Slot and with Liverpool can change right up to the wire. And honestly, even in game week 24, they've got 2 fixtures between the first and the second game in game week 24. So there could even be rotation, injuries, all of that within that starting lineup, even within that space of time. So none of them fill me with loads of confidence right now. And I'm leaving myself open a Liverpool slot right now, just on the chance that one of them seems like the safest pick by the time we get there. In terms of selling Luis Diaz right now, I think I'd probably take the risk on holding on to him. But if you don't have Gordon, then I think that is a move I'd be very tempted to just get done right now. And Burmo, I'd probably wait, and you could hold on to Liverpool for another week.
Yeah, exactly. I think because of where they've put the second game in 24, it creates all sorts of uncertainties, frankly, with Liverpool. And you're right that I think there's a big carrot, which is the Ipswich Town game in game week 23, which is where I mentioned looking at Gakpo, for example, for that week for a Jackson who plays Man City. That might be an okay time to do it, and with Darwin seemingly just they've given up on that particular experiment. But the point I was going to make was that between Bournemouth and Everton in the double game week, they also have the Spurs game and also the Plymouth game in the FA Cup. So it's quite it's quite tricky really in terms of how this all sort of slots together, pun not intended. And then the Wolves game is 4 days after the Everton, after the Merseyside derby, I believe. So yeah, it's all in very close proximity. And I think you're probably sat there thinking probably a start and a sub off the bench for whoever you bring in, and that should probably colour your thinking as well. The safest thing, and we'll talk about this kind of next week, is probably a bit more of a boring move with a Van Dijk or a Canate, frankly. But them's the breaks really. If you do go for it, then you're going to have to just aim big during the time that these players are on the pitch. Yeah, mentioned Jackson being sold. Cunha being sold by 75,000 was benched, and this week, perhaps surprisingly against Newcastle. I don't know what that was. And
I think
then
he's still carrying something.
maybe, but carrying some glasses in his pocket. Yeah, and then Raya being sold by 51,000. So people beginning to lose faith in the Arsenal double defense. Just worth quickly mentioning. So a couple people in the chat, animations were saying that he's looking at making goalkeeper transfer. So they are beginning to appear on radars. And Dan, a Phil Gas friend of the pod, has brought in sales for Raya this week. So yeah, goalkeeper transfers are becoming on the menu for some people. For me, historically, I've loved the goalkeeper transfer, Sam, but it does sort of feel like at the moment that I want to keep the powder dry again when it comes to that. And if I wasn't making a goalkeeper transfer, if I didn't own Mikolenko, I'd be looking to buy Pickford. It might even, I'm not sure what would need to happen, Sam, for this to happen, but there may be a possibility that I'd end up doing Raya to Allison at some point. Maybe. I mean, that I don't think that's going to happen. Like, I kind of curled my nose up at just saying that, but it could happen at some point. But I don't know. It always feels like, unless you're kind of sat there with 4 or 5 free transfers or whatever, or you need to free up money, which may be the case for a few people here. It really does feel like it got to be so low on your list of priorities to move a goalkeeper on, especially, I don't know, Arsenal, yes, second best for XUC this year. And the Spurs game, deflected shot from Son, and other than that, we just didn't look like we were going to concede, frankly, in the derby. I don't think it would take very much for things to completely turn their head. That said, we've got Villa and Man City in the next 3, both games which I'd probably expect us to concede. So, the horse for the course is really perhaps on that one.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned the 2 tough games in terms of clean sheets in the next 3, but if you take a longer horizon at the next 5, you've got Wolves, Leicester, and West Ham in there as well. So I wouldn't be surprised with 3 clean sheets in the next 5, which, if you're holding on to Raya, that's probably okay. The obvious annoyance is the fact that game week 24, which is the double for Allison and Pickford, is Man City at home for Raya, which doesn't fill you with confidence. So yeah, you mentioned Allison as kind of a joke. That is someone that I'm seriously considering for game week 24 because you can easily hop across to it. It sorts out the triple Liverpool and doesn't disturb some of the players I'm already fairly happy with in my starting lineup. And if I'm not confident on any of the other of the 3 Liverpool attackers in terms of Salah with who next to him, then Allison might just be the safe bet if I can't get to someone like Van Dijk or Konate doesn't look safe. Let's say whether it's injury proneness or whether it's rotation, that might not be a safe play at the time, but I'll assess it when I get closer. I think if I could have done Raya down to a Sells or a Pickford and upgraded João Pedro to Wood with 2 free transfers, that would have been a very tempting move for me this week. But because I needed that little bit extra money and I'd have to go down to a 4.5 like a Henderson, I'm just not loving it. So that's why Raya probably stays for the next 2, where I think there's at least a decent chance of a clean sheet in more likely the Wolves game. But home against Villa, I wouldn't completely discount it either, considering the data.
No, definitely not. Well, okay, good collection of transfers, and delve into them a bit more next week. On to the bold claims for this time round, and it's another double strikeout, unfortunately.
Yeah, no win for me. Isak to be beaten by Solanke was always going to be bold. It's here for a reason, after all. Did not happen. Isak obviously pretty much mega hauled Solanke. Not so much. He got a goal, I suppose, much to my chagrin, because Gabriel is in my team and I might have gone early on the celebrations on that one. So that was difficult to walk back from, but it's one of those game weeks, isn't it, Tom?
Yeah. No chance that's being upgraded, I'm afraid, to an assist or a goal.
No.
Just because it hits Dragusin, I think, having it the slow mo. Mine was Jackson to punish the sellers / benches. I was thinking of benching them for Raul Jimenez with a double-digit haul. Much to my chagrin, it didn't happen. But hey, we move on next week.
Next week, I am going with the Brentford boys, that being Wissa and Mbeumo against Liverpool at home, in case you need reminding, to outscore in combination against Isak and Gordon, obviously at home to Bournemouth. So yeah, it's a combination play. I'm picking the Brentford attackers to beat the Newcastle attackers. So we'll add up their points and see who comes out on top.
Fair enough. And happiness hedge for me, obviously, Chris Wood blank against Southampton.
And I would love that.
That's got to be fantastic odds on that. But here's the most transferred player in. We've seen the most transferred player be a thing in the past. All right, best captain this week.
Yeah.
Chris Wood again appears in this one. I'd probably say Salah versus Brentford, Palmer versus Wolves, Wood versus Southampton, maybe Isaac versus Bournemouth, who are back in the form. I suspect he's going to elicit a few more captains this week. So yeah, quite an interesting mix as well. I'm currently bossed on Palmer versus Wolves just because of what I saw of Wolves defending and what I saw about in terms of points being left on the table for him and Mr. Jackson. So, yeah, I think I'll do that, but it's actually kind of 60-40 between him and Salah, because obviously Brentford do give up chances. I think he and them and City were matched on XG, weren't they, in the 2-2 draw? But yeah, it's difficult obviously to go against Salah, but I do really like that Wolves game for Palmer and Chelsea.
Yeah, I do wonder if I'm also succumbing a little bit to hindsight bias, but I think my bus team, when we come over to it, actually has Salah captain. That's only because I haven't changed it yet. I'm also feeling Palmer at home to Wolves is a pretty good opportunity to go against Salah. Look, Salah against Brentford's a great fixture. Brentford give up a lot of XG, but at home they're a bit of a different beast, and they've got a system that does seem to work quite well against the stronger opponents, especially at home. So I do just wonder if it will be tough to break them down that left-hand side of Brentford's defence. A lot depends, I think, on whether Rico Henry is ready to start the game, because I think if you bring him in from the start for the first time in, I believe, 16, 17 months against Salah, first time in the league in 16, 17 months, rather. He's played, obviously, some reserve football, all that good stuff. Against Salah, though, that's a whole different prospect. So I wonder if they brave it with him. And if they do, then maybe that changes the dynamic a little bit. But Wolves are giving up a lot of big chances at the moment. And we saw what Palmer and Chelsea can do against Wolves earlier this season. I kind of back him to do it again. And I think one of the things I noted down between last season and this is, if in doubt, back the home fixture in a 50-50 call. And this is a pretty 50-50 call for me. And I think I'm probably going to back the home fixture.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, taking. I feel like it will definitely be, just because I think that you'll see a lot of residual people moving on to Isaac now because he's done loads of points this week. I do think the three of them again are above 100%. I wonder if that might last a tiny little while. I think the week after it probably is Salah, isn't it? With the Ipswich game at home, and obviously in 24 it's Salah triple captain time for a lot of people. So but yeah, another okay week to take on Salah, probably with less confidence than I did for the Forest game. I think you'll be hoping for Salah's goal and assist to be outweighed by Palmer getting a goal and 2 assists. That's kind of what you're looking at. I think you're probably going to be happy factoring in a return for Salah. So yeah, or 2. So it's a bit more of a risky game, I think, than the Forest game when I was a little bit more confident that maybe there was a chance of the blank. But yeah, favour in the home game myself too. And then finally, onto our teams and plans. The goals has gone in for United.
It has indeed.
It's you.
It's me. So yeah, to start off, obviously, as I mentioned, 4 free transfers. I've got double Arsenal defence at home to Villa. I've got Brentford away for Trent and Salah, who currently has the armband, as I explained in my bus team. Amad Diallo's just scored, which is fantastic. That's great news for me. Who does start at home to Brighton right now in my starting 11 for next game week. Hall and Isak are my Newcastle representatives at home to Bournemouth. I would love to add Gordon into that mix as well, but as discussed, probably the only way of doing so is getting rid of Mbeumo at home to Liverpool, which I don't hate as a fixture, but if I'm going to be a little bit loose with my transfers and can maybe see a way that I don't need to use them all in the next few game weeks, then possibly I can make that move. After that, Palmer will probably be my captain, although the decision is not made just yet. I need to do some more thinking and some data crunching there. Jackson is being given a stay of execution once again at home to Wolves. And outside of that, it's João Pedro away at Man United, which honestly, I'm not loving the idea of, but Man United have not been brilliant themselves. So penalty taker, he got taken off a little bit early today. Is probably okay.
Yeah.
Semenyo and Robinson away at Leicester at the moment are on my bench. If anyone can explain to me who I'm benching for Robinson, that would be great, because I'd love to play him, but I just don't know how I'm going to bench anyone else.
Ahmad, maybe, I don't know, or João Pedro. I mean, João Pedro
Penalty
has been.
taker.
I know, but I yeah, you just hope you get away with it, right? I mean, I kind of did with Jimenez, like just about. Like if he almost got a touch on the Iwobi first clean the first ball that went all the way through, right? I think Fulham's Twitter actually gave it to
They did,
Raul straight away, and I was like, oh, for God's sake, of course, because Jackson just missed all his chances, and turned out that it was all right in the end. But yeah, I mean. Maybe Ahmad, maybe João Pedro, and hope you get lucky. But yeah, I know what you mean. It's a tough situation. Robinson's 2 assists, of course. Obviously, FPL friendly assists too.
This is the thing. I don't want to get overexcited by Robinson. He's massively overperforming. He's brilliant. Don't get me wrong, but am I really benching an attacker for him? I just don't know if I can get on board with it. It's tough though.
Yeah, fair play. All right. And for me, I'm looking to roll, I think, as well. Benching Ahmad at the moment, just because Gordon, Isaac, Palmer, Jackson, Salah, Raul, Jimenez in the Leicester game, and Sarr versus West Ham, who are depleted. I don't know. It's I could potentially bench Sarr for Ahmad, but this kind of feels like the right configuration at the moment. I could think about that more. And then the captaincy is currently on Palmer. No Forest representation in my team at all. And that is the main worry this week. I think a lot of it kind of just comes down to, as I spoke about a couple of weeks ago, in terms of, when you see the effective ownership come out, I think it will come down to basically a bit of rooting for the negative, hoping that Southampton, I'll be the biggest Saints fan you've ever seen this weekend, Sam, and obviously hoping that my guys who are taking them on, the likes of Hall, and the likes of Raul Jimenez against Leicester and Jackson against Wolves principally, do come through with the goods to swallow up and compete against that inevitable Wood 9-pointer, I think, is what I'm kind of pegging that as. And then Palmer comes through with more than Salah, effectively. I think that's kind of going to be what the week swings on. But yeah, sometimes you get weeks like this, like, as we've just seen, and it can be quite harsh in terms of the swing. So I'm not going to be too worried about a red arrow or a green arrow this week. I don't think it's going to be. It's very hard to read the tea leaves on this one, really, especially when we're going in without Forest players. But I think we're doing it for the right reasons, principally.
Yeah, I think so, but it doesn't make it any easier, does it, Tom? And it's one of those weeks where sofas will be required, and we will be hiding behind them if we both do go without Chris Wood or Nottingham Forest defence, which it looks likely that we will be doing at the moment. But as we reach the end of the pod, we are still all systems go in the United Southampton game. 1-1, Ahmad scored, but we're not going to hang around just for full time there. So fingers crossed, either Southampton pull off a winner, or if they don't and we sadly lose, Ahmad's the one to do the damage. But for the meantime, thank you all so much for listening. We were Who Got the Assist. You can find us on Blue Sky at WGTA or FPL Pricey. On Twitter, or X as you want to call it, WGTA_FPL or FPL Pricey on there for me. And again on Instagram or Threads at WGTA.FPL, FPL Pricey once again. If you did enjoy the pod, if you could give us a follow on those socials, that'd be greatly appreciated. But also if you could give the pod a 5-star rating wherever you're listening in, or if you're watching along on YouTube, whether it's live or next day at any point, give us a like. Click subscribe. It's really, really helpful for us. But thank you in advance for doing any of those things.
Yep, indeed. Thanks for listening. And watching. We'll definitely, absolutely be back next Tuesday to dig into our system manager and chip strategy discussion. Sorry that's been a bit delayed. Just feel like we need to do it justice. And the game weeks have fallen, as I said, in such a way as there's a bit of a gap, but equally gives us a bit of time to breathe rather than spitting hot takes, I guess. Anyway, hope it's just you think about the week ahead. See you next Tuesday.
Oh, it's a goal. Who got the assist?